Hello, welcome, all new listeners and returning listeners to the Agile Matrix Podcast. And we're here for another enlightening episode. And I'm your ever exciting host, Tammy. And today we have a special guest joining us, a really special guest. He's a thought leader, a trailblazer in the Agile world, and a renowned author. And we have none other than Al Shalloway. Now, Al is not just a name in the industry. He's a force to be reckoned with decades of experience helping organizations navigate the complexities of Agile and Lean practices. Al brings to us a wealth of knowledge, experience, and insight, and it brings that into our conversation today. So we'll be diving deep into Al's experience and what he's, been involved in over the last couple of years, and also uncovering the keys to successful implementation of Agile in today's fast-paced world. So what's my advice to you right now? I would say relax, grab your favorite beverage, settle in, and get ready to embark on the journey of discovery with us with the incomparable Al Shalloway. So let's jump in. Welcome to this podcast, Al.
Well, thanks for having me, Tammy. I really love that intro.
Thank you for coming on. It's an honor to actually have you on.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, really.
Okay. So first of all, Al, obviously I've studied you for a while. I know who you are. Can you just tell our listeners who is Al?
Well, I guess I am kind of a pioneer. I'm a lot of things. I've got a great family, so I'm a husband and a father and a slave to a kitty. And but in work, I'm really striving to figure out how to do our jobs better so we can become more productive. And one of the things I know is that companies operate at a very small fraction. Even most of the people would consider successful, I'm talking 10 to 15% of their capability. And I've seen this for a long time. And yes, some people have done a lot better, but I'm really trying to break that. I think we could be operating at 3, 4, 5 times what we are. And to me, that would change the world if people were all of a sudden 3 to 4. I'm not talking about individuals. I'm talking about organizations.
Organizations, yeah.
So that's my view. That's what I'm trying to do. And I'm not doing this based on my intellectual power, but there are so many people out there, Deming, Akoff, Reinertsen, Guild, Goldratt, that it's each of them has angled it. I think the way I view my role is how do I integrate all these thoughts into a more actionable whole than what you get when you look at one aspect. And I've been doing this now I've been doing it for like ever. I mean, started software development in 70, 71 when I was in school, but I would say I only got reflective in 83 when I started looking at, it actually sounds funny, but I can still remember this. In 84, it was actually. In 84, I wrote a bug and I asked myself, gee, I wonder what I was doing when I wrote this bug. Now, I assure you, this was not the first bug I'd written in 14 years.
Wow.
I'd written lots of bugs, hundreds of bugs, thousands of bugs. But I never stopped to ask, what was my way of being? What was I doing that had me do this? And part of the reason I'd done a personal development course the year before that had me become more reflective and noticing how I live my life. And I know it's not a coincidence that this happened a few months later. So what was interesting, though, and I want to be clear, I was a really good programmer then. Okay. And I've been programming for 14 years. That was the thing. Gee, why did it take me 14 years to ask this? And what hit me was two things. It wasn't like I hadn't studied programming. I knew like 6, 7, 8 languages at that point. So I'd done that. I'd read a lot of books. But I'd always just, made a bug, fix it. Oh, I could have done this, but like, how was I being? What was like, maybe I was distracted. Maybe I wasn't paying attention. Maybe the thought process I was using. See, I told you, here's my video. So I remember starting to, every time I wrote a bug, literally every time I wrote a bug, I had a yellow pad and I started, I wrote this bug. Yeah. What was it like? Well, I wasn't paying attention. I was thinking about the football game next week. I didn't understand the requirement. I mean, it was a lot of stuff and I figured I'd fill up a page or two. Well, a pad later.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it was like ridiculous. I mean, I was right. I mean, I hate to tell you, I wrote a lot of books, but what I noticed was you can't solve the problem this way. You can't just something happened and you reflect on it.
Yeah.
It wasn't, I didn't wait a whole pad, but several pages later, and there's 25 bugs per page. So a few hundred bugs later, I realized, wow. So then I decided I should study this. What is causing this to happen? And I did, and that's when I got into how you code better and what's the thought process. And I did this for several years. And then when design patterns came out, I really got into design patterns because I had read Christopher Alexander, The Timeless Way of Building, and the Oregon Experiment, and a pattern language. I felt I knew his stuff, but I couldn't get it to work. I mean, it's funny. I knew what he was saying, sort of. I knew the patterns, sort of, but I wasn't using them. So that means I didn't understand them.
Yeah, true.
I thought I knew them, yeah. So I remember having a problem where I knew they applied, and I remember kind of mind melding, say, with Alexander, what would he tell me, kind of thing, which is an interesting technique, by the way, when you're stuck and you can't get something done.
Yeah.
I learned this years ago. What you do is you pretend you're talking to the person that you think would know the answer. And I figured he would know the answer. So I've done this several times, and it's always been a huge breakthrough.
Okay.
So I flipped my whole design approach. This was in 97, 98. I realized that the way I designed, now I was one of these 10X programmers. I mean, I don't want to pat myself on the back too much, but I had a history when I was doing programming at IBM and developing software on my own. I was one of these guys. I mean, I built stuff and redid stuff other people did in a fraction of the time. And so I was a good programmer, but I had a certain way of designing. And the way I designed is I looked at the pieces of it and then I put them together. And that makes sense, And in the book, Christopher Alexander says something like, most people look at design as you find your components and you put them together. Then he says, but now I didn't even read another word. The moment he says most people think of design as this process of putting components together, but when somebody says that, you're wrong.
Yeah.
I said, how did he know I did this? And he said, no, that's not how you design systems. And I will be tying this into the Agile space. There's a reason, because this was the massive breakthrough for me in design. He says what you have to do is look at the whole, and you decompose, but you don't decompose it into separate pieces. You decompose where you keep the relationships between things. And then you can keep decomposing. See, this is the exact opposite of the way most people design. They take the pieces. And in Agile, they take the practices and then they put them together. Like SAFe, it's a collection of zillions of practices. The problem isn't how big SAFe is, it's how it's composed.
Yeah.
Think of Wikipedia. If you double the number of entries in Wikipedia, would it be any more complicated? And the answer is no, because there's a navigation system in Wikipedia that lets you find things.
Yeah.
A lot of times they don't have what I want. I wish they had more. At times they have what I want, but they don't have it in its depth. I'd want more. Wikipedia is easy to navigate. SAFe isn't easy to navigate. Now, I'm not a SAFe basher. I think a lot of people just tend to bash it for, it's popular to bash, but there's good stuff in SAFe. There actually is good stuff in SAFe, but there's also some, they don't have it quite right in SAFe. The point is, you have to look at things holistically. So anyway, I won't go through all the details of my history, but that lesson from 97, 98 is what I used to write a couple of books, Design Patterns Explained with Jim Trott, which is still a great design book of holistically looking what patterns are, as how they are solutions within the context you're in and how they all fit together, thinking in patterns and all that. And then when I formed that objectives in 99, I started it on the basis of this because I knew how to do architecture across organizations in a simple way and how pieces would go together and how you don't design big up front, but you design enough so you can change your design. That's the key, change design. That's what you have to do. I loved XP when it came out. I found after a year or two, I couldn't find people who wanted to do XP because they didn't want to pair and they didn't want to test first. So I went to Scrum because Scrum was basically neuter to XP. In some ways, maybe I shouldn't say it that way, but more or less it's easy. Incremental development, building things. You're in this framework and you're just figuring out what to do and willing to do. So Scrum was a lot easier. Big Scrum trainer. We were actually a big Scrum shop. big is relative, 2 people back in 2002 to 2004. But
Yeah.
I mean, 2 trainers. We had about 5 or 6 people at the time.
Oh, nice.
But what I found was that it was Agile in general is very team centric. It left management out. There's no systems thinking in it. And I was never happy with that. In fact, I never signed the Agile Manifesto. And the reason I didn't sign the Agile Manifesto is what I felt was a fundamental misunderstanding of systems thinking and the interaction between workflow, specification, and people. Now, I agree, process should not be imposed on people. That you can't, people over process, I understood what they meant.
Yeah.
But I also understood how it was going to get interpreted down the road. And Don Reinertson says this too. He says it's not people over process, it's people times process. It's the two interact with each other. Now, if it's the process before the Agile Manifesto, yeah, no, then it'd be people minus process. I get it. But you should know what to do and you should have understanding. And since that time, since the Agile Manifesto has been out, you've had theories of flow, how to apply lean into software, theory of constraints into software. There are first principles of knowledge work. In other words, if I overload you, and you see this in Scrum teams, you see this everywhere, actually, it's not just Scrum. You know, so you pull, excuse me, if you get interrupted, so you've got the right number of things going on and you're working great, and then somebody throws something else at you. Well, what happens is now you're multitasking more. You have delays in your workflow. You end up discovering errors in your thought process or bugs in your code, or just how you build something later, which means the time from when you did it until when you discovered it, a lot of that time is wasted. So you work on useless things, unplanned work, and now you fall behind. Now there's more pressure to push stuff onto you. Okay. So that's what I mean by first principles. That's one of many. Amplio has identified 10 that I think are key. Now there are hundreds, but I believe that there are a few that if you understand these, you can basically fill in the gaps. I mean, Don Reinertson has 175, not all of the principles, but they're really good in his book, you know, principles of product development. So that's where I'm going, is how do you understand what's going on, recognizing, and this is the key, recognizing that most people don't want to make that investment. Now, they won't say that, but that's the reality of it. People like, oh, yeah, you go take a 2-day course, come back, tell us what to do.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, so that's a problem. So I rambled a bit there. I can keep going, or you can interject with a question.
I was going to ask a question, actually. Thank you for all that. I want to ask a question. So now you mentioned something that you didn't sign the Agile Manifesto. Now, looking through your profile, I realized that you actually were there before the manifesto doing these things. So tell me between, you know, the manifesto coming up and now, how has it been? Obviously, you were doing your own experiments and getting work done. Now that the manifesto has come out and we have all these agile processes that are mainstream, how has it been?
Well, you see, here's the thing. I knew, so I was one of the early ones, and in '99, the XP programming group had gotten together, and that's really where Agile kind of grew from. Scrum had been in existence a few years before. Yeah, people knew about it. I knew about Scrum, but nobody was doing it. But XP, well, there were some, but XP was the hot button. And Ken Swaber was on the XP programming group. And that's where we chatted about things, and we were chatting about what's going to happen. And to me, what I knew was the situation was we were building things iteratively, and that they were increments we were building. And I also added the term integrated. So everything was integrated, everything was together. So yeah, I'd been doing that for a few years. I had done some studies where we did, you know, we didn't call it Yagni, but we were kind of doing that. And I was introduced to XP with Martin Fowler at a conference in Germany. And what hit me when I heard about it was, oh my God, this makes so much sense. Now I'm going to say something, and I'm not saying I was doing XP before XP. I'm not saying that.
Okay.
Was true, though, was of the 12 practices in XP, I had done every one of them before I read about them in XP. But what I wasn't doing is I wasn't doing them in a concerted, cohesive And there's a big difference. Oh yeah, you do a list practice here, you do that practice. No, I'd never done them all together. So the moment they put them together, I was like, oh my God, why didn't I think of this? I didn't think of that, but
yeah.
But so I was very engaged in this, but I have been a student of Deming.
Okay.
By 2001, I'd been studying Deming for about 25 years. So I'd been doing systems thinking, Senge. So I was a systems thinker. I was a holistic viewer of things. I had studied Alexander. You designed from the whole. So when the manifesto came out, what you had is, first of all, it was team-centric.
Yes.
All about the team. It ignored management. And it ignored it was the systems thinking part that was the key, and the ignoring management. And what I knew that you needed is to take a holistic view, and management has a role. Now, their role is not to micromanage people.
Yeah.
Their role is to improve the environment that people work in. And this idea that you can grow from the bottom up goes against everything I know about design since 97. And I tell you, when I learned something new, like I did with Alexander's work, the first thing I try to do is disprove it.
Okay.
Because I get passionate about things, and I tend to get overexcited about things. So if I just buy into it, I've drunk the Kool-Aid, and it could be wrong. And if I try to disprove it, it might be wrong, and I might still have the Kool-Aid, but at least I'm trying to see where the edge
tested it. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I knew was that things didn't work well from the bottom up. And at Net Objectives, we'd had experience of this. We tried doing scrums and team coordination. It didn't work. There's a lot of overhead to it. It just didn't work in practice. So early on, so that's why I didn't sign it, because I knew it was flawed fundamentally. Now, I want to also be clear about this. I am not saying had I been there, it would have been better.
I see. Okay.
I was asked back, by the way, for the 10-year anniversary, because I'd formerly Kanban University with David Anderson, and Kanban was coming up and all that. I was back there for that. And that was interesting because we had about 25 people with about 18 or so different opinions about what Agile was. I'm not kidding. Everybody was all fractionated. Very interesting. So what, by the way, I want to add one other point. We say, yeah, you can't go bottom up. You've got to get top down advice. And I'm saying, no, sorry. That's still thinking in terms of hierarchies. We should not be thinking in terms of hierarchies. Hierarchies cause silos. So bottom up with top down improvement, no, that doesn't work. I've not seen that work much. I won't say it never works, but it doesn't work as well as taking a value creation, delivery, value flow method of working. Where's the idea? How does it run through the organization, through to the customer and back? Now, people call this sometimes value stream management. I'm big on value stream management, but also value delivery flow, things like that. Or value flow delivery, I guess. And to me, that's what was needed. And I knew this even back then because I'd been studying Deming and Lean. I'd actually started studying Lean or Toyota back in '88 as well. This guy who introduced us to Deming introduced us to Toyota as this brilliant business coach. So I knew there was something wrong with the paradigm of the was said in the manifesto, not with what was intended. I want to be clear about that.
I get what you're saying.
There's a difference between what they intended, and I knew what they intended. And, you know, I get OCD sometimes, I admit it. So I got a little on my high haunches, and I didn't sign it because this is the right intention, but the wrong way of saying I'm a mathematician by training. So, man, you better get it right in the formula.
True.
You know, and by the time I decided to hell with it, Alan, sign it anyway, just because you agree with the intention, and they'd close out the signatory. So I couldn't sign it. So, but that's why it's the wrong paradigm. And that's not true. What's intended is the right paradigm.
Yeah.
People have to figure it out. You have to adjust. You have to be pivoting. You have to respect people. You have to work in concert. All that intention is right, but it's from a team-centric, which is a myopic view, and you have to solve Agile at an organization-wide view.
Yes.
And the manifesto is insufficient for that. And I don't even think it's the right foundation for it, because again, with a manifesto, you have to do a bottom-up approach of components. And the bottom-up, guided from the top, is not any different than saying I'm building a system from its components. I want to say one last thing on that. I'll get another question.
Mm.
So I'm a big systems thinker. One of my favorite systems thinking guy is Russ Akoff. And Akoff, and he passed years ago. I don't remember when he passed. I've listened to a lot of his videos. A lot of his talks were videotaped. And one of the things that he says that's extremely salient, and you could really see this yourself, he says systems are more about the relationships between the components than the components themselves. And when I heard him say this, I realized, this is what Alexander is saying. Alexander is saying, take the system, you decompose, but now you have these two parts, and it's the relationship between the two parts that tells you what to do. Like if I've got a courtyard and a house I'm going to put with a veranda around it, then I build the veranda based on the relationship between the courtyard and the house. I got the pieces, but they're not separate. Okay. Yes. Unless I'm in California and then you do cookie cutter housing and things. Just kidding. I like
the UK as well. So yeah.
You think of these ancient cities like, well, man, the Italian villas are so beautiful. Everything's a little different, but everything kind of fits.
Yes.
That's how we need to design. That requires an overarching view, not to tell people what to do, but to tell people how to talk to each other, how to communicate with each other, alignment, get the value. And then within that, teams get to decide what to do. Okay. This is basically what Amplio is. Amplio has a few, I would say, that's my kind of brand approach. The major characteristics of that are, first of all, let's be clear. We have to take an organization-wide view. Yeah. And we have to see what works within it. Now, if you don't have an organization-wide view, you're a member of a team like your Scrum team, and you're trying to figure out how do I work when I don't have control of all that, then that's fine. Recognize you're working within that bigger context. Yeah. Recognize the impact that bigger context is putting on you. Take the attitude that people are not malicious. If they're doing bad things to you, it's because they don't understand. Now, I'm not saying they don't understand. What I'm saying is take that attitude, because if you take the attitude they're malicious, you have no hope to convince them.
True.
If you take the attitude they're this way because they don't understand, then maybe if you talk to them from that attitude, first of all, you'll be more receptive. They'll be more receptive to you. Maybe they don't understand, and maybe you can explain it to them. And then maybe they'll work with you because they want you to do better. See, but you don't hear this much in Agile.
Yeah, true.
This was one of the things that also bothered me when management was neglected.
Yeah.
And I know why. It was because management wasn't always a good thing right then, but you can't ignore them. You got to tell them. In other words, there's a role for management. It's not micromanaging teams. It's creating environments that teams can thrive in.
Thriving, yeah.
You don't hear this much. Yeah. Anyway.
You know, the interesting thing, I had a conversation with someone earlier today, and I mentioned that same thing because he was like, we just touched on topic of SAFe. And then we both said, like what you said, it's easy. A lot of people bash SAFe on LinkedIn and everywhere because it's a big target to bash. And I said something that you've actually alluded to, which was, I get the bashing, but in all the frameworks that we have, we're almost at local maximum with the teams. Almost no one is addressing how the business and the teams work together.
Yeah.
Because like you said, you have to take a systemic view of everything. It's not just delivering something. It's, are we delivering the right thing? Can the business and more on the Agile principles talked about the business and developers talking daily, but we structure the frameworks that keep the business separate and keep the developers separate, like then the Apple garage working, but they actually need to talk.
Yeah, they're part of the reason for that is I don't think it's been understood until recently. The real principles here. Excuse me, hiccuping. The thing is, again, SAFe and Scrum take two opposite extremes here. Scrum takes a very simple view, do these things, but it tends to be simplistic. You don't have enough. You have to recreate what other people know. Most people don't. When you're in a pressure environment, and one of the things I like about Scrum when it's done well is I got these 2 weeks worth of work, say I'm on a 2-week sprint. And then I kind of have this little field of 2 weeks where I can work the way I want to get it done. But in reality, that tends not to work because I got dependencies on other people. They have dependencies on me. Management doesn't understand what's going on. See, the pull method is not always understood. Pull, in other words, instead of people telling me what to do as a team, I'm going to pull 2 weeks worth of work. I get to set how much I can get done.
Yeah.
And that's good. But how much within that 2 weeks do I get done? And why don't I get it done? And a lot of the reasons I don't get it done is because I work on too many things. People open up all the stories at the beginning of the sprint. This is a horrible thing to do. And they say, well, we're trying to teach people how to think. No, don't, if I go to where you are, now you're in the UK, right?
Yeah.
Somebody better tell me you drive on the wrong side of the road. I'm just kidding. That's a quick learn. That's a quick learn. But a lot of these other things, you really need to be given guidance. And people are afraid. I've just been really thinking about this. See, giving guidance is different than telling people what to do.
Yeah.
In other words, having a framework where people have to figure out stuff to do. Okay, that's one way of doing it. Telling people everything to do, that's another way of doing it. Both of those have their problems. Yeah. I suggest what you do is you start with something that works for you. It's been tailored a little bit. Like in Amplio, I have a decision table that helps people decide should they be doing time boxing or flow.
Okay.
What do they do when they don't have cross-functional teams? And sure, you'd like to be able to do what's in the ideal space, but that doesn't always work.
Context. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's the right word, context. So what you do is you have a little bit of conversation about, well, what would fit for us as best we know? Let's start with that because that's easy. It might look like a hybrid at first, but that's not how I'm thinking. What I'm thinking is underneath it all are these principles that drive both Scrum or Kanban.
Yeah.
And you get to, once you start easy, you can adjust it as you learn things and as you need to. See, the trick is not to be complete and everything like safe, too complicated, or to be simplistic like Scrum, let you figure it out. Both of those fail in their own way. The trick is to give you what you need when you need it and to have an easy starting point and then accessing it. It's the accessibility. It's how do you get to the thing? And this is what I'm doing with the ACE program. What I like about my ACE program is real exciting to me. And we had kind of a good shift in teamwork. Like, they're not just students of mine. They're helping me build this thing. Because, I've got courseware. I've created the discipline Agile Value Stream Consultant. Of course, I couldn't use that. I had to rebuild it. It's been about 2.5 years since I left the PMI. In that time, I basically rebuilt everything from the ground up with, you do something once, you can sometimes step back and, well, how would I have done it now? What did I miss? What have I been stepping over, knowing it was wrong, but I didn't have time to fix it, like that. So, but what's cool is I'm saying, look, there's no end to this. We're not going to come up with a solution that's the best. That's the other thing. 23 years ago, Agile's about learning new ways, and we haven't learned new ways in 23 years to make a better foundation.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, something's wrong here. So they're working with me on this. I teach them and they learn things, and I've got hundreds of slides and Lucid Spark or Miro kind of boards to help you with things. But together we're learning, because this is the other in-sync piece to me. So it's one thing to see all the different things you can do, right? All the practice. Do I do sprints? Do I do Kanban? Do I do this? Do I do that? What are all the practices? Okay, that's one thing. It's another, that's what I call business agility. What are the rules of business agility? That's content. It's another thing. How do I know which ones I should be using? That's consulting.
Yeah.
Okay. And the third one is, how do I enroll somebody else in that's what they think too, or they guide me to the better way than I think. In other words, how do I collaboratively coach people to get to better results? And it's not just by standing back, and it's not by telling, it's by working together. So that's the heart of my programs. I do business agility, consulting, and coaching in 3 tracks simultaneously integrated with each other. And yet you don't see this. And when I say it like that, why don't we see this? Really, why don't we see this? Why don't we have a way to get an easy start and then grow as we need? And it's not follow until you understand. I don't like people following until they understand. Why? Well, you say, you got to follow it until you understand that. They'll bring up chess. Well, if I never played chess before, I have no experience with chess. If you've been developing product poorly, horribly, waterfall, the worst way imaginable, you have experience in developing product a bad way.
Yeah.
So you know what not to do. You just don't know what to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. So now you know what not to do. You don't know what to do, but if somebody tells you what to do, Like hold that shovel instead of the curve side up where you get very little dirt on it, put the curve side down. Now notice it's like a bowl. Oh, I was wondering why the dirt kept falling off the shovel and people were telling me shovels were so good. What the hell's going on here? I'm so glad you gave me that insight. See, I've accessed their dormant knowledge here.
Mm-hmm.
So this follow until you understand is very demeaning. It's very disrespectful, but more important or as important is it slows learning down. And it then makes people feel they have to follow. And when they get a new idea, they got to go run someplace and say, hey, is this okay? Does this framework tell me it's okay? Instead of learning on their own what makes sense. And I'll be honest, that bothers me when I see all these other people not even noticing. They're good-hearted. I'm not trying to put any aspersion on it.
Yeah.
Most people just don't see something and they hold something close to their heart. And not just the leaders, but individuals. We're afraid we're afraid to expose we don't know something.
Yes.
Our fear is mostly to ourselves. That's what people tend to forget. They talk about a safe environment. Well, it's between your ears. That's where it's not safe.
True. I think you mentioned Amplio.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about it? Because I know you dotted it about, but I think I want our listeners to actually know what that is about.
Well, so amplio means to improve in Latin. Actually, there are a variety. It also means to get larger. Depending on what dictionary translation you use, it means enlarge, improve. I latched on to improve. So I'm going to say that's my definition in Latin.
Okay. We'll take that.
And I don't speak Latin, but I did look at different dictionaries, and that came up a couple of times.
Okay.
So I'm a scientist, a mathematician, and a psychologist, all rolled. I actually have a degree in psychology. I've always been interested in it. My real understanding of human psychology, though, it doesn't come from that, but comes from in the 80s when I was very active in personal development work. Things like S Training, LogoNet, now Landmark. I'm not active now, but I spent hours and hours and hours and hours with watching other people who are amazing and how they interacted with people and see how people, they don't resist per se. It's out of fear. They don't know what's coming. So then they resist because of the fear. And also seeing how people have filters, and how people actually don't listen to other people. They listen to what
they want to say.
Would call the listening of what they're going to. So I'm going to say this to the listener now so you can get a sense of this. See, I'm saying you're not listening to me. You're having a conversation in your head, and that conversation is what you're listening to.
Yeah.
And you say, what conversation is he talking about? That's the conversation I'm talking about. What is he talking about? That's conversation.
Yeah.
And when I studied some people who were really amazing in this in the 80s. And one of them, Fernando Flores, called this you're listening, not as a verb, but as a noun. In other words, we have listening actively, we're listening and all that as an action. But this conversation in our head, he called that you're listening. And what I do is I take these three things I mentioned before. There's the content, there's how do you decide it, how do you coach somebody in it. See, this is where what you have to do. We've all heard of active listening, like I'm listening to you and hearing what you're saying. But there's what I call active speaking. And active speaking is as I'm talking to you, I'm listening. I'm trying to hear what your listening is. Okay, and I can ask you sometimes, or sometimes you'll say something like you say, "Oh, management's bad." Well, then you've got a conversation in your head about management. I can ask you questions about, well, why do you say management's bad? What's bad about management? So I speak to that conversation, to this conversation that we have inside. And it's something we actually, I think, have a natural knowledge, ability, but it's a skill that you need to work on. It's not like now that I mentioned, what I'm doing. But see so Amplio, sorry, I got a little off track on that because I'm actually having a coaching class. This is one of the key pieces of it. And Paula Stewart and I are writing a book on coaching that's going to come out in a few weeks. And this is part of it. She works with Landmark. She's very, very astute with this. I'm really glad we work together because I was focusing more on the normal coaching stuff, but this filters, how people listen, how they make decisions, very critical. Okay. So what Amplio is first of all, it goes back to what I can call the physics of flow. There are rules.
Okay.
Overload people, all that stuff goes wrong. You don't get feedback, all these things go wrong. And I know the world's complex, but to be candid, if you got quick feedback, you can deal with complexity very well. So I don't worry about that. Mm-hmm. Okay. So there's that. There's those rules, those principles. Those can give you a guidance on what to do. And then what I do is I use that as a foundation. I call that Amplio Foundations. And then on top of that, I take all these great practices that are out there, but I couch them as patterns. In other words, how do you do planning or even meta patterns? Because there's planning at the team, there's planning at the organization. Those would be separate patterns.
Yeah.
And patterns have been called, solutions to recurring problems in a context, but they're really more than that. They're really more, what are the issues involved? What are the forces involved? How do you decide what to do? So Amplio is a collection of about, I don't know, I guess there are about 50 organization-wide patterns and about 30 team-level patterns, and I put them together. You don't have to study them all. You don't need to know them all. Again, you use what you need. And there's a way to go in to a company and see what their challenges are. See, this is the other thing. Predetermined frameworks make no sense to me. Everybody knows what are you trying to do? Before you see what your problem is, you can't see what your problem is until you know what you're up to. Problems are not inherent. Everybody would say, what are the police cars in your country? What color are the flashing lights? They blue?
Blue, I think, yeah, blue.
Okay, so let's say they're blue. In the United States, they're blue and red. So in the United States, if I see a blue and red flashing light in my rear view mirror, I say, oh my God, I have a problem.
Okay, well,
not necessarily.
True. Yeah.
Not necessarily. If I'm just driving and I'm trying to get someplace and I don't want to lose money, I have a problem. Well, when one of my sons was driving his wife to the hospital because she was in labor and it was snowing and he wasn't sure he was going to get there, when that flashing light and oh, thank God, I'm so glad there's a policeman there. And I'm not kidding. I'm not making this up. And they took her to the hospital and everybody's great.
Oh, wow. That's
first granddaughter. Well, not my first granddaughter with him.
Okay.
I've got 5 granddaughters now and 1 son.
Whoa, nice.
But it's like problems are because there's something stopping us from what we're up to.
Yeah.
So you got to get clear. What are you up to? What are you guys trying to accomplish? Then you can see what are the challenges. They know what their challenges are, but they don't know how to get around them. So Amplio is designed where you first of all see the generic, value delivery flow. Then you look at what are they up to? What are the challenges? How do I diagnose what they're doing or not doing wrong? And then what solutions will work for them now that I can do it in the context they're in? So it can be applied to anything. I mean, you could take SAFe and apply it. You could take Scrum and apply it because it's this problem solving approach. Or if you want to start with it, well, Al, this just sounds really complicated. Well, actually, that's what I'm training my aces to do. What I train them to do is, and we work together because I've done this for years at Net Objectives, but I haven't trained people like this at Net Objectives. I'd always brought in really good consultants and then I helped make them better. Yeah, but so what we have is I have really good consultants in the ACE program, but what I'm doing is I'm talking to them. Well, what would help you with a client? What do you need to know? So then we've created the system, and the idea is to get them to work with a company. Oh, you say you want to do Scrum, or you say you want to do Kanban. Well, what are you really trying to accomplish? And then I'm not going to build it from the ground zero where you have to do all this time. I'm going to talk to you, and together we'll say, what are some of the issues? And then I'll give you a solution that fits you as easily as Scrum would fit you, or as easy as Kanban, because both of them are different. One's like little changes, Kanban method, which is not the only way to do Kanban, but Scrum is, here you jump to this. We'll figure this out together, and then we'll start. And then you'll understand right from the beginning why this is a good idea. You may not have had the understanding to build it yourself, but you'll understand together why it's a good idea. And then what'll happen is I'll teach you. Part of the workshop is teaching them and getting them access to the Amplio decision stuff, so they can go on their own. They don't need me. They don't need the ACE anymore. They might want the ACE to solve other problems, but that's another issue. So I think that's where we need to go. Is when Agile started 23 years ago, it was for early adopters, people and innovators, people who were willing to figure stuff out. They were often had good programmers in it, and it was a digital world back then for those people. Now we're really digital world. And we're with late adopters, admittedly, sometimes even laggards. And they have a different way of thinking about it. And yet you need to present then that change to those people as well.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong, by the way, there's nothing wrong with being hesitant. I learned this from, I keep forgetting her name, Linda Rising. Oh, I love Linda Rising. uh, and she had this talk about people resisting. And before I listened to this, I was oh yeah, people resist this. I actually don't believe people always resist, but it was like, well, when they do, frustrating. And she was talking about why that's a good thing. And I'm like, well, you got to listen to Linda when she says something, because she's like wise. She's one of these wise people. Says, yeah, think about it. It's an evolutionary thing too. Back in the day, 10,000 years ago, I spot some berries and I'm ready to eat them. And you said, Al, maybe not. Maybe they're poison. Maybe we ought to check it out.
Okay, I see what you mean. Yeah,
I'm dead. So you're around. So Ellen doesn't listen to anybody.
I see what you
So
mean.
she wasn't defending resistance in general.
Yeah,
She
yeah.
was saying that there is a place for it. And that's where, again, principles can come, because you can say, okay, well, let's talk about this. What's bad about this? What's possible? What's the risk? What do we not know? How do we make it safe to try this?
Yeah, yeah.
But when we simplify, it's just too easy to say, oh, resistance is bad. Oh, they're not doing what I said. Now, the key to me is you got to redefine what a coach is. Because coach is not just this, oh, we're doing this approach, so I'm going to coach you on how to do this approach. No, we first of all want to get you doing what you should be doing. And this approach is maybe a way to get there. And the reason it's good to have two approaches at least is because then you got more flexibility.
Yeah.
But better would be to know what are the principles underneath both. Here's a new metaphor I got for this. You ever see those cooking shows, where there's some cooking shows where they get to pick what they want to cook and they compete against each other. But the fun ones are, they are put in the kitchen with stuff they don't even know what's in there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they put these great chefs in these, they don't even know what's there. And they say, okay, go. And they have to look in the pantry and they make up a recipe on the spot.
Well,
that's the way a coach is when they go into a team. You don't know what's there.
exactly.
And oh, crap, I only know how to make lasagna and tuna noodle pudding. And they don't have anything like lasagna or tuna noodle pudding here. But I got hired, so we're going to make lasagna. That's how a lot of coaches do it. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah. No. What you're saying is so powerful, because I've seen coaches where they're, like I said on one of my podcasts, they're one trick pony. So anyway they go, that statement, if all you know, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything's a nail.
Exactly.
They go with, but you have to look at and like you said, if you don't understand what they're trying to achieve, you won't appreciate the problem they're trying to solve. And then you won't be able to diagnose and give the right solution to the problem. But then if you're a one trick pony, no matter what they say, you will deploy the same thing. And it could work in some places, but when it fails, it will fail badly because the context would defeat it.
Yeah, there's something really insidious about this, which is one of the things I guess I'm on a campaign to stop. If you're a one-trick pony, and if you're a manager who's decided to go one way with that pony, then you've got this trap, and the trap is this: even if you don't know what to do, how can you say that? You just got hired because of this technique. And even if you knew what to do, but you're not an expert in it, how do you say that? Because you say, well, you brought me in for this, but we really should be doing this. And I said, but I don't know this well. So you just cost yourself a job. But here's the other part. The manager brought you in. You might say, well, I'm afraid to tell him, but he's afraid to tell his boss.
True.
Because he just blew his training budget on the wrong thing. So this thing of the people who sell one-trick ponies, the problem is they say, oh, well, you can switch. And I say, no, not after you've blown your budget.
True.
Not after you put your reputation on this. They ignore the human aspect. That's why this human aspect in Agile is so important. Everybody talks about how it's so important, but nobody does anything about it. They talk about you need these values to be effective. Great. How do you get those? And you actually cannot instill values. What you need is like transparency. Just take that as an example. Transparency is more than just, of course, having sheets and stuff. It means I'm going to be honest. I'm going to tell you what's going on. I'm going to have the courage to tell you what's going on. Okay. Not everybody. Most people have those values. They don't show up at times when they're afraid.
Yeah.
So to say you need the values is an incomplete statement. you need to create an environment in which these values will show up. Most places that put Agile in don't have those, because most businesses don't have those.
Yeah.
So how do you instill those? Not instill those. The values are there. How do you make it safe for the values to show up?
Yeah, to come up.
People don't talk about this. It's just, oh, they don't have the values. They failed. That's not my fault. This is their fault. It's like, no. This is when I talk about the Amplio, I also have like, what is an Amplio coach? What's the attitude of an Amplio coach? And I have two things that come up to the front. One is a visionary. We believe there's a better way. We can do it. And the second one is what I call responsibility. People mess up responsibility. Responsibility does not mean blame. It's where you're coming from. So I go into a place, I'm responsible for them getting better. Now, if they don't get better, I'm not to blame, but I'm responsible. So when they mess up, I look at, why did they mess up? What could I have done differently? How am I not communicating with them? I don't put it on them. That's why I invite people to tell me what's wrong with Amplio. How are you misunderstanding it? And then I go back and I adjust it. That's why I like working with the aces, because they tell me. There's a running joke. I've got one guy who always tells me what I did wrong, and another guy that tells me what I left out. And it's like, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Feedback is valuable.
Because I'm responsible. This visionary and responsibility go together, and you don't see that in the Agile space. That's one of my biggest gripes. People are hawking stuff that's causing problems and then blaming the people they're selling it to for it not working. It just drives me nuts.
Okay.
Anyway.
So a quick one question. So you mentioned Amplio. Now you mentioned the ACEs. Now I'm aware that you have a community of practice.
Okay, yeah. So the community of practice. So the community of practice has gone through some changes, say it nicely.
Okay. Evolution?
Evolution, yeah. I like that word better. It sounds like I'm going someplace. So the community of practice basically now is, right now, basically all it is we meet mostly Wednesday mornings as one of the ACE sessions where people can ask questions and we have general conversations about things. But what I'm also building is a self-study program for them, because to be candid, I mean, I don't charge anything for it. So I really can't put a lot of time. It's more of an exposure. And so the way it's going to work going forward, and like I'm not doing anything next week. Every 5 weeks or so, I take a break from the ACE program to give them a break from me, and me just a break to think. So I schedule these in next week. I'm doing that. And one of the things I'll be doing is coming up with a way to continue this 1 hour free session. People can come in, they can ask questions, or they're just with the aces and me working on things. But here, learn this, like little key pieces of things and lay it out. I had started this a few weeks ago, but the problem was I didn't have a good structure for it. And it ended up just being this, like, not a book, but a lot of stuff. And I didn't like that. One of the key things I'm doing right now with the Amplio system is what I call the Amplio system visual, which is a show of how value delivery flow works and where all the pieces are, and I can tack things onto it. So I think I'm going to be able to put this on there. I'd be interested, actually, if any of your listeners asked, what would they like to have as kind of a weekly learn a little bit? And I think, so I'd be looking for input, but I think what I'm going to do is focus a little bit on the key missing concepts that I think, like the foundations, which are not mine. I mean, these are things that these Acuff, Goldratt, all those people have talked about, Reinertson, Gill, Deming. So maybe have some of those, but more to shift people's view on things, why we need integrated coaching, consulting, and the content, why you don't want to follow until you understand, really maybe just instead of trying to give answers or to solutions or whatever, is to kind of, I hate to use the word attack, but to kind of question, to question some of these fundamental beliefs that I believe are really killing Agile, or the intention of Agile. And this is good, because I admit I had worked in one way, and then I kind of was going to this Q&A session, which has been useful. I have some people come and they like it and all that. but I think I need to be a little more focused. And I think the way to be a little more focused is to really challenge some of the common knowledge we have that nobody's challenging. Nobody allows to be challenged. You know, if you challenge it, you know, it's kind of like that question I started with. What was I doing when I wrote a book? Well, why are teams going off and doing things badly? Why do we have feature factories? I know very well why we have feature factories. Why do you have too many stories open at the end of the sprint? I know very well why that's going on. But if you say that, you have to talk about people practices that aren't working, or you have to talk about things in a way that they'll think you're telling people what to do. And I don't mean that. We got to challenge our thought process. Now, not everybody has to challenge the thought process. Remember, I'm redefining the coach.
Yeah.
The coach can go into the team and say, hey, does this work? You guys, let's work together, figure out something. And that's essential. That the coach does not tell them what to do, but that doesn't mean they let them figure it out by themselves.
Yeah.
You know, there's this middle ground. I learned this early. In '88, I had a business coach who ran, well, he wasn't really a business coach. He ran workshops, and I was in the workshops. But the thing was about getting us to think. And I remember we met like every other week or once a month or something for a year. And I remember when he taught something, I knew it before he said it. And I was very well aware of that. But I was also very well aware that if he wasn't there, I wouldn't have known it.
Yeah.
I just picked it up quickly. But he would ask questions and he would show us stuff, and it would enable me to put it together. See, that's how coaches should be. He wasn't saying do this, but by the time we got to it, I said, oh, I should do this. And then he would say, you know, it might be useful to do that. Oh, that's good. Yeah, let's do that. That's what's needed. And that's what I teach in the Amplio program. Now I have other things. I have a coaching workshop. I have what I call Amplio development, which is for the team level. I have something on, it's kind of like a Scrum at scale, but it existed years before. It's kind of funny. In fact, this is an interesting story. So in 2008, and I have a write-up of this. I went into a place that did a lot of Scrum. They were doing Scrum really, really well. Jeff Sutherland had been there, so they knew what they were doing. And they were using small increments, not increments like the sprint increment, but you know, they were we can get this done in 6 weeks. It can't be done any less. And they would build it and focus on it. Really good. So I was wondering, why am I here? You know, and the problem was they couldn't get it out the door quickly. They could build the pieces quickly. Again, going back to it was the integration. And what happened was this: they would have like 3 teams. Like you'd have the application team, you had a component team for the application, you'd have the component team. And sometimes you can actually reorganize into cross-functional teams, but sometimes you need the structure. And the problem was they would have this 6 weeks chunk of work. It was the smallest thing they could build and get out the door. So that was good. But then they would split up. Okay, you do this, you do this, you do this. And then the teams would work independently of each other, or they would try to coordinate.
Yeah.
But each team would do what was best for them.
Not the whole.
So you had to coordinate. Exactly. So what we did is we just flipped it into, okay, you got this 6 weeks worth of work. Have one backlog. And the top of the backlog is the feature that you want done. Then the next feature, then the next feature. And then the teams would pull it off and work basically automatically aligned. And it just saved a lot of time. They had what was like 6 weeks of integration they did instantly. But here's what's interesting about this, because I thought about this. I figured out this approach. Now, one of my other consultants who was really amazing had done shared backlog. So I knew that in the back of my head as a possibility. But I'd figured out all the coordination for the first time. It took me 2 hours to figure it out. And I know Scrum at scale took years to figure out. I'm like, well, I'm not that much smarter or at all smarter than those guys. So, you know, it wasn't brain power. What wasn't? See, when you get successes, you need to stop and say, what happened? That's when you really learn. A failure might get you to stop, but when you have a success, you want to, whoa, why did that happen? This was one of those, why did that happen? And I this is how I learned about emergent design. I get sometimes, wow, I didn't expect that to happen, but it worked. Why? So I thought about it. I didn't even really think much of it, to be candid, because getting teams to work together is actually very simple when you understand flow and lean and theory of constraint and you use alignment. So it was just a natural, just switch this to this, and they picked it up just like that.
Yeah.
I've had some very big successes that have been dramatically quick. And it's because it wasn't working on the practices. It was working on the paradigm of how people were thinking together.
Yeah.
And this is powerful. I'm not saying you will just simplify everything. I'm not saying that at all. But the key is understanding from the beginning. And the key is having somebody create that understanding. So like with my business consultant guy, he was a lot smarter than me, but the way he exposed it to me, I could keep up with him. And that's what a coach should be. They need to know this stuff. They don't need to know programming, but they need to know flow and lean and theory of constraints.
Yeah.
Not so they tell anybody what to do, but so they can guide them and say, oh yeah, if I did that, if I drove on the right side of, if I drove on the left side of the road in London, I'd probably do better.
True.
But most agilists are like driving backwards on the wrong side of the road, complaining how difficult it is. Because they don't know these basics. And that's my message. We got to learn this stuff.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. So final question. Like I always ask when I do a podcast is, so my listeners are here. What's the one thing you would say from all that you've been through, putting together Amplio? And to be fair, you're going to tell us how to contact you, how to reach you on Amplio, how to join the community of practice and all that. You tell us that later. But what's the one thing you say to the listeners to go, let's take note of this fact? What's the thing you would tell them?
Okay. Well, I can't say it in one sentence, but I could give the lead in one sentence. Trust yourself. You are more capable than you imagine. Now, I got to pull that out a little bit. We're taught that we're not capable from child. Oh, don't do that. Oh, you were wrong. Oh, you did. It's just ingrained in our brain. So then when people tell us to follow until you understand it, I've got from when I could understand English until now, I have, especially in the formative years, I've got a history. So I buy into it. Don't buy that. Don't accept anybody else's limitations on you. Now, that said, there are limitations, but don't let other people put them on you. So don't just do what you want. You cannot do just what you want. Teams self-organize wrong as often as they self-organize properly. Teams decide not to do practices that they should be doing, and they do practices they shouldn't be doing. So how do I reconcile these two thoughts? So the number one thing is trust yourself. That's the number one thing. But be realistic and take a scientific approach and learn. And it's not just inspect and adapt. It's got to be, what's your model of understanding? How do you test it? How do you validate it? And how do you be open to that you're wrong? We need to shift from being wrong is painful to being wrong is a learning. It doesn't feel good. Humans are messed up this way. Now, let me tell you what I mean by that. I know it's a longer than you meant, but this is an interesting thing somebody pointed out to me. He asked me the question, think of a time you're doing something wrong, but before you discovered it was wrong, what were you thinking and how did it feel? Well, I felt I'm doing it right and it feels good.
Yeah, true.
Now remember the time you realized it was wrong. What were you thinking and how did it feel? This is on crap and it doesn't feel good. Now you think about that. Our being a human being means when we discover something new and better, we get pissed off at ourselves and that we're wrong. That's wrong. That's just messed up.
Yeah, true.
So when you trust yourself,
yeah,
you can accept that. I mean, seriously, this takes a long time. I'm not saying, oh, Al's right, he's going to go, well, you do. No, this is a lifetime work.
Yeah.
Every time the micromanagement, that's the worst thing in the world, is not by managers. It's by ourselves, continuously judging ourselves about what we're doing. Give yourself a break, pat your body, say good, and pick up and move forward. That'd be my advice. Trust yourself, but be sensible on learning.
No, it is very true. Because when you look at it, I mean, when we say welcome requirements, even late in development, what do we say to the Agilists?
Yeah, we're learning something.
As updated requirements. You've learned more. You learned better.
Yeah, absolutely.
So take it on board and move on.
And actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's in the Agile Manifesto. And that's one of the awesome things about the manifesto. It's saying this learning is a healthy place. So I didn't mean to say that I don't like the manifesto per se.
No.
It's good. And that's a great example of it. Hey, this is a good thing. Let's absorb this and do this.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, thank you for that. So now tell us, how can we reach you we've mentioned Amplio, we mentioned success engineering. How can our listeners reach you and all that?
Yeah. The easiest way is my website is success engineering, no punctuation, just the word success and engineering.works, WORKS, successengineering.works. I'm real easy. Email al.shalloway, that's SHALLOWAY at successengineering.works. So that's the easiest way. On LinkedIn, if you look for Al Shalloway, I'm the only Al Shalloway I know of in the world. I mean,
Okay.
Shalloway is an interesting name. So almost everybody who's got a Shalloway last name is related to me. It's a derivation of the word Soloveitchik, which is a famous rabbi years back that's Polish. My grandfather emigrated through Ireland, so you can imagine. Who are you? Soloveitchik. You're Shalloway now.
Okay, now I see.
So that's why it's a unique name. Yeah. There were a lot of Soloveitchiks, but how many went through Ireland?
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Al. It's been fantastic
hearing
you. I've learned a lot,
really
actually. Yeah, I learned a lot, and I'm hoping our listeners also learned a lot. So thank you so very much for coming on. So thank you, dear listeners. We've been speaking on Al for a while. It's been very interesting. I've learned a lot. I'm sure you have as well. Now, one thing to draw from what Al talked about, really, that we discussed was context always is important, right? So thank you very much for joining the Agile Matrix Podcast. It's been fantastic speaking with Al, and I look forward to speaking, bringing a new guest. Like I told you guys on the podcast, I'm going to bring in interesting leaders that have actually put Agile principles to work in their different contexts, and I've actually brought success in the process. So keep staying tuned. If you haven't subscribed to follow the podcast, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a fantastic evening.